A little boy sneaks into a charity gala to sell candy for his sick mom, only for the billionaire host to stop everything and make an announcement that leaves everyone speechless. 8-year-old Oliver Choke stood on the sidewalk, his heart hammering in his chest as he watched luxury cars glide up to the entrance of the grand ballroom. The hotel's golden doors swung open again and again, letting out glimpses of sparkling gowns, crisp tuxedos, and laughter that felt a world away from the life he knew. His fingers curled tightly around the tray of homemade candy he carried, small, carefully wrapped chocolates his mother used to make when times were better. Now, they weren't just sweets. They were his last hope. He took a deep breath, shifting from foot to foot as he rehearsed his plan in his head. All he had to do was get inside, sell enough candy to pay for his mom's medicine, and get out before anyone questioned why a boy in scuffed sneakers was walking around a black-tie event. Easy. He adjusted the oversized blazer he had borrowed from a thrift store, too long in the sleeves, too loose around the shoulders, and walked forward with as much confidence as an 8-year-old could fake. The first hurdle was getting past the doorman. The man barely glanced at him as he held the door open for a glamorous couple stepping out of a limousine. Oliver took his chance, slipping in behind them and ducking his head as if he belonged. The scent of expensive perfume and roasted meats filled the air as he stepped into the marble-floored lobby, blinking at the towering chandeliers that hung overhead. He had never seen so much gold in his life. For a split second, he felt like he had stepped into a fairy tale. Then, reality came rushing back. He wasn't here to gawk. He had work to do. Keeping his head down, he walked toward the ballroom, weaving through guests while hugging his candy tray close to his chest. Every step made his stomach twist. One wrong move, and he'd be tossed out before he had a chance to sell even a single piece. He needed a strategy. A waiter swept past him, expertly balancing a tray of champagne flutes. Oliver's eyes darted around the room, spotting the other servers, all dressed in crisp white shirts and black vests. Maybe, just maybe, if he looked the part, no one would notice him. He took a deep breath and grabbed an empty tray from a side table, balancing it on one hand as he walked with forced confidence. He tried mimicking the way the waiters moved, steady, poised. For a moment, it seemed to be working. No one questioned him. He passed by groups of laughing guests, his pulse pounding with each step. Then he nearly walked straight into a security guard. Panic shot through him. The man's eyes flicked toward him, then down at his tray. Oliver gripped it tightly, bracing himself. Before the guard could ask anything, Oliver turned sharply and moved toward the dessert table, pretending to be delivering something. He placed the tray down and pretended to inspect the elaborate spread of pastries, his mind racing. His luck wouldn't hold out forever. He had to make a move. Spotting a well-dressed couple standing near the edge of the room, Oliver swallowed hard and approached them, holding out a small wrapped chocolate with a forced smile. "Would you like to buy some candy?" he asked, keeping his voice light. The woman, draped in a silk gown, gave him a brief glance before raising a perfectly arched brow. Her diamond earrings glinted under the chandelier light. "Excuse me?" she said, as if he had just spoken in another language. "It's homemade," Oliver said quickly. "Only $2 each." The man beside her chuckled under his breath. "That's adorable," he murmured, nudging his wife's arm. "I think we have a little entrepreneur here." Oliver's stomach tensed. He recognized that tone, the kind adults used when they found something amusing but had no real intention of taking it seriously. The woman shook her head and waved a dismissive hand. "That's sweet, but I don't carry cash." Oliver forced a smile and moved on, his confidence slipping. He approached another guest, then another, each rejection weighing heavier than the last. Some ignored him completely. Others offered polite smiles before turning away. A few chuckled, patting him on the head like he was a child playing pretend. He clenched his teeth and kept going, but the lump in his throat grew. He had thought this would work. He had thought that if he could just get inside, rich people would buy anything. They had so much, what was a couple of dollars to them? But he was beginning to realize that it wasn't that simple. They didn't see him. They saw a novelty, a child out of place, something to be entertained by but not taken seriously. He felt a hand suddenly grip his shoulder. His breath caught. Security. "Hey, kid," a deep voice said. "What do you think you're doing here?" Oliver's heart pounded as he turned, looking up at a burly man in a black suit. The security guard's expression was unreadable, but his grip on Oliver's arm made it clear he wasn't supposed to be here. "I was just—" Oliver started, but his voice cracked. He looked around, searching for an escape, but he was trapped between the guard and the sea of guests. "You don't belong here," the guard said, steering him toward the exit. No. No. This couldn't be happening. He still hadn't sold anything. He hadn't even come close. Desperation clawed at his throat. He had promised his mom he'd find a way. He had promised her he'd help. He opened his mouth, scrambling for words, any words, that might make the guard let him go. But before he could say anything, another voice cut through the air, stopping them both. "Hold it right there." The voice was calm but commanding, instantly drawing the attention of the surrounding guests. The security guard paused, his grip on Oliver loosening slightly as he turned toward the source of the interruption. A tall man stood near the center of the ballroom, holding a glass of whiskey in one hand. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his dark hair neatly combed back, but it was his presence that caught Oliver's attention. People weren't just looking at him, they were waiting, watching, hanging on to his every move. Oliver didn't know much about the world of the rich, but even he knew who this was. Maxwell Harrington, the billionaire who had organized the entire gala. The man's sharp blue eyes landed on Oliver, scanning him with something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't amusement either. He took a slow sip of his drink, then spoke again, his voice quieter but no less firm. "What's going on here?" The security guard straightened, letting go of Oliver's arm. "Just removing an uninvited guest, sir." Maxwell didn't respond immediately. He took another sip of his drink, then lowered the glass. "I see," he said, his gaze never leaving Oliver. He tilted his head slightly. "And what, exactly, was our uninvited guest doing?" The guard hesitated. "Selling candy, sir." For a moment, there was silence. Then, to Oliver's complete shock, Maxwell smirked. "Well," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "This I have to hear." The silence in the ballroom stretched as all eyes turned toward Maxwell Harrington. Oliver felt his stomach twist into knots. He had never been the center of attention before, at least, not in a way that felt this dangerous. The guests, who had barely given him a second glance before, now seemed deeply invested in whatever was about to happen. He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the edge of his tray, as if holding onto it could keep him grounded. Maxwell took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. The security guard still had a firm grip on Oliver's arm, but the billionaire gave a slight nod, and just like that, the man let go. Oliver rubbed at the spot instinctively, not quite sure whether he had just been rescued or if things were about to get much worse. "Well?" Maxwell said, his deep voice carrying easily across the quiet ballroom. "You going to tell me why you're here, kid? Or should I take a guess?" Oliver hesitated, his mind racing. He knew how this worked. Rich people like Maxwell didn't waste their time on kids like him. This wasn't a real question. It was just a moment before he got kicked out. But then, Maxwell lifted an eyebrow, his gaze steady, and Oliver realized something strange. He was actually waiting for an answer. Straightening his back, Oliver cleared his throat. His voice was small but steady when he finally spoke. I just need to make enough money to help my mom." The room, which had already been quiet, somehow grew even stiller. The woman in the silk gown who had dismissed him earlier shifted uncomfortably. The murmuring at the surrounding tables died down, replaced by something heavier. Curiosity. Maybe even guilt. Maxwell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Your mom," he repeated. "She's sick?" Oliver nodded quickly. "She needs medicine. It's too expensive, so I thought maybe if I sold enough candy." He trailed off, the last part of his sentence feeling too foolish to finish in front of people who spent more money on a single dinner than he had ever seen in his life. Maxwell exhaled, setting his drink down on a nearby table. Then, before Oliver could react, he reached out and plucked a piece of candy from the tray. Oliver stiffened, unsure what was happening, as the billionaire unwrapped it with deliberate slowness. He popped the chocolate into his mouth, chewing thoughtfully while the entire ballroom watched in stunned silence. After a long moment, Maxwell smirked. "Not bad," he said, his voice casual, like they were just two businessmen discussing a deal. "A little sweet for my taste, but I've had worse." The tension in Oliver's chest loosened just slightly, but he barely had time to process the strange turn of events before Maxwell straightened and turned toward the audience. "But," he continued, his voice taking on a new weight, a kind of command that only people like him could carry, "I think we can do better." Oliver blinked. "Better?" he echoed uncertainly. Maxwell didn't answer right away. Instead, he grabbed the microphone from a passing waiter, who looked like he had absolutely no idea what was happening, and faced the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice rich with authority, "this boy came here tonight with a plan. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he fought for it. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I respect that." There were a few murmurs from the crowd. Some guests nodded, shifting in their seats, while others still seemed unsure. Maxwell continued before they could start questioning what, exactly, was happening. "Think about it. He could have stolen. He could have begged. But instead, he came here, to a room full of people who wouldn't miss a few dollars, and tried to earn it the honest way. That's not just business sense, that's guts." Oliver felt his face heat up. He wasn't sure if he should be proud or terrified. Maxwell smirked and turned back to him. "How much were you hoping to make tonight?" Oliver hesitated. Maybe $50? A soft chuckle rippled through the crowd, but it wasn't mocking. It was more like disbelief. Maxwell let out a short laugh of his own before clapping a firm hand on Oliver's shoulder. "50? Kid, I don't think you're thinking big enough." Oliver frowned, confused, but before he could ask what that meant, Maxwell lifted the microphone again. "I'll tell you what," he announced, his gaze sweeping over the guests. "I'll start by covering all of his mother's medical bills. Every single one." A collective gasp spread through the room. Oliver's breath caught in his throat. He stared up at Maxwell, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. He couldn't have meant that. He couldn't be serious. But Maxwell wasn't done. "And," he continued, ignoring the stunned silence, "I'll also match every donation made tonight. Dollar for dollar." His smirk widened, his sharp gaze locking onto the wealthiest people in the room. "So, who's feeling generous?" For a moment, no one moved. Then a voice from one of the front tables called out, "I'll donate 20,000. I'll do 30. Another guest added, standing up. 50,000. I'll match that." The room erupted. Hands flew into the air as numbers were thrown out, one after another, growing wilder and wilder. Oliver could barely keep up, his head spinning as the numbers climbed higher and higher. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. He had been struggling to sell $2 chocolates, and now people were throwing around thousands, hundreds of thousands, like it was pocket change. Maxwell's smirk deepened. "Looks like you just made a lot more than $50, kid." Oliver's hands tightened around his tray, his whole body buzzing with disbelief. I don't understand," he admitted quietly. Maxwell crouched down so they were at eye level. His voice lowered, softer now, meant just for Oliver to hear. "You wanted to help your mom," he said simply. "Now you can." Something thick lodged itself in Oliver's throat. His eyes stung, and he swallowed hard, refusing to cry in front of all these people. He had never been given anything in his life. Not like this. Not by someone like Maxwell Harrington. A warm hand squeezed his shoulder, grounding him. "You fought for her," Maxwell added, standing up. "That's what matters." Oliver looked up at him, at the man who had just turned his entire world upside down, and for the first time since stepping into this ballroom, he let himself believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The ballroom was a blur of movement and murmured voices as the donations rolled in faster than Oliver could process. His fingers still clenched the edges of his candy tray, as if letting go might wake him from whatever strange, impossible dream he had stumbled into. Just moments ago, he had been fighting to sell a few chocolates to strangers who barely acknowledged him. Now, those same people were throwing out numbers so large they hardly sounded real. Maxwell stood beside him, still holding the microphone, watching the room with a knowing smirk. He had played this game before. He knew exactly how to turn hesitation into competition, how to turn a moment of generosity into something bigger than any of these people had planned for. 50,000! Another guest called from the back. I'll donate 100,000! Someone else countered. The numbers kept climbing, each bid triggering another, until a woman in a silver dress with diamonds at her throat held up her champagne glass and declared, $250,000. A ripple of shock went through the room. Oliver could barely breathe. He had never even seen more than a few crumpled bills at a time. Maxwell chuckled, raising an eyebrow. That's a bold number, he said. But you sure you want to stop there? Seems like a wasted opportunity. The woman narrowed her eyes at him before lifting her chin. Fine, she said. Make it 300,000. Laughter and cheers broke out. Someone clinked their glass. The atmosphere had shifted completely. It was no longer just a charity gala. It was a spectacle, a challenge, a game where the goal was to outdo the person next to you. Oliver was still trying to wrap his head around it when another voice, louder and more panicked than the others, cut through the bidding war. I'll donate 10,000? Heads turned. At the far edge of the ballroom, a waiter holding an empty tray stood frozen, his face rapidly losing color as he realized his mistake. He had been walking past when a paddle landed in his hands, shoved there by a distracted guest. Without thinking, he had raised it, and now everyone was staring at him. Maxwell let out a short, amused breath. Well, looks like our service staff is more generous than some of you. A burst of laughter followed, and someone in the crowd took pity on the poor waiter. I'll cover his bid, the guest who had mistakenly given him the paddle called out, raising his own. And I'll double it. More cheers. More glasses raised. The number on the donation board in the corner of the ballroom kept climbing higher. Oliver watched in awe, unable to look away from the glowing red digits that seemed to update every few seconds. By the time the last bid was placed, the room had settled into a satisfied hum. The final number flashed on the screen. $1,540,000. Oliver swayed slightly, lightheaded. That number. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. Maxwell turned to him with a smirk. Not bad for a night's work, huh? Oliver licked his lips, his voice small but firm. I only needed $100. Maxwell chuckled, setting the microphone down on the table behind him. Yeah, well, sometimes life over-delivers. The room erupted into applause, and Oliver barely registered any of it. His legs felt unsteady, his mind a mess of emotions he couldn't name. He had done it. He had actually done it. His mom was going to be okay. The weight that had been pressing on his chest for so long, the constant fear, the worry, lifted, leaving behind something strange and unfamiliar. Hope. A hand landed on his shoulder, grounding him. He looked up to find Maxwell watching him with something softer in his eyes, something different from the smug confidence he had carried through the entire event. Come on, kid, he said. Let's get you home. Oliver hesitated. The idea of leaving this place, the room where everything had changed, felt surreal. But home meant Mom. And suddenly, he couldn't wait to see her. He nodded, gripping his candy tray like a lifeline. Okay. The ballroom doors loomed ahead, the exit so close. But as they moved through the crowd, Oliver noticed something strange. The same people who had ignored him before were now watching him with something new in their expressions. Not pity. Not amusement. Something warmer. Some of them even stopped him, pressing bills into his hands, congratulating him, telling him he was brave. Brave. The word clung to him in a way that made his chest ache. He had never thought of himself that way before. Maxwell guided him outside, the night air crisp against Oliver's flushed face. A sleek black car was already waiting at the curb. The kind of car that made people stop and stare. Maxwell opened the door and motioned for Oliver to get in. "Where do you live?" Oliver hesitated for only a second before mumbling his address. He was suddenly aware of the contrast, how out of place a billionaire's car would look in his neighborhood. But Maxwell didn't comment. He simply nodded to the driver before settling into the seat beside him. The ride was quiet at first. Oliver was too busy trying to process everything that had just happened. He clutched the folded bills in his lap, still struggling to believe they were real. After a while, Maxwell finally spoke. "So, you made this candy yourself?" Oliver blinked, caught off guard by the question. My mom taught me," he said. "She used to make them for special occasions." Maxwell nodded, looking thoughtful. "They're good," he admitted. "I wasn't just being nice back there." Oliver glanced up at him, a flicker of something like pride settling in his chest. "Thanks." Silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, like something important was shifting, even if either of them had the words for it yet. As the car rolled to a stop in front of Oliver's apartment building, he felt a sudden pang of uncertainty. He had spent so long worrying about what would happen if he failed, he hadn't really thought about what came next. What happened after a night like this? Maxwell seemed to sense the hesitation. "You did good tonight," he said simply. Oliver swallowed. "So did you." Maxwell smirked. "Yeah, well, I had help." Oliver let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then, gripping his tray tightly, he reached for the door handle. But before he could step out, Maxwell's voice stopped him. "Hey, kid!" Oliver turned. Maxwell's expression had shifted, something more serious settling into his features. "I meant it when I said I'd take care of everything. Your mom's going to be okay." Oliver nodded slowly, his throat too tight to speak. He stepped out of the car, watching as it pulled away into the night. And for the first time in a long, long time, he allowed himself to believe that things were finally going to be okay. The car ride to Oliver's apartment was quieter than before. He sat with his hands gripping his candy tray, his mind still reeling from the events of the evening. Every so often, he'd glance at Maxwell, who seemed more relaxed than he had been at the gala, his jacket unbuttoned, his expression unreadable as he watched the city blur past. Oliver still wasn't sure what to make of the billionaire. He had expected a man like Maxwell to laugh him off or maybe give him a pat on the head and send him on his way. But instead, he had taken him seriously. He had helped. And not in a way that made Oliver feel small, but in a way that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he mattered. The car finally slowed as they turned onto Oliver Street, the buildings growing smaller, older, more worn. The contrast between this neighborhood and the ballroom Maxwell had just left behind couldn't have been starker. The streetlights flickered, the sidewalks cracked, and the paint on the front doors peeled from years of neglect. It wasn't a place where expensive cars like Maxwell's usually stopped. But tonight, as the vehicle came to a halt in front of a modest, run-down apartment complex, it was exactly where he needed to be. Maxwell glanced at the building, then at Oliver. "This is home?" he asked, his tone neutral. Oliver nodded. "Yeah. It's not fancy, but it's ours." He hesitated, then added, "Well, as long as we can keep up with rent." Maxwell didn't say anything to that. He simply exhaled, opened his door, and stepped out. Oliver hesitated for a second before following, his heart thudding with anticipation. His mom was going to be so relieved. She wouldn't have to worry anymore. They wouldn't have to count pennies just to afford her medicine. Everything was finally going to be okay. He led Maxwell up the worn-out stairs, each creak of the old wood echoing through the quiet hallway. When they reached his door, he adjusted his grip on his candy tray, then knocked lightly. There was a pause, then the faint sound of shuffling from inside. A moment later, the door creaked open. Emily Choke stood in the doorway, exhaustion written across her face. She was still wearing her work uniform, an old blue button-up with a coffee shop logo on the sleeve, and her hair was pulled into a messy bun. The dark circles under her eyes told Oliver she hadn't slept much. But when she saw him, her expression softened, and she let out a breath of relief. "Oliver," she said, pulling him into a quick hug. "Where have you been?" "I was worried sick." "I'm fine, Mom," Oliver said quickly, pulling back. "But you're not gonna believe what happened." Before Emily could question him, her gaze lifted past his shoulder and landed on Maxwell. She froze. For a long moment, she just stared, blinking as if she wasn't entirely sure whether she was imagining the sharply dressed billionaire standing in her doorway. "You're Maxwell Harrington," she finally managed, her voice wary. Maxwell gave her a small, almost amused smirk. "Guilty." Emily's eyes flicked back to Oliver, then to Maxwell again, her expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. "Why is a billionaire standing outside my apartment?" Her tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. Oliver, still beaming with excitement, opened his mouth to explain, but Maxwell stepped forward, holding out a neatly folded piece of paper. "Because," he said, "your son crashed my gala tonight." Emily's expression morphed into shock, then horror. "Oliver!" She turned to him, her voice dropping into a sharp whisper. "Please tell me you didn't. I was selling candy." Oliver interrupted, exasperated. "And it worked. Mom, they gave me over $1 million. Emily's face paled. Her gaze darted back to Maxwell, then to the check in his hand. Her fingers twitched like she wanted to take it, but she didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms. I don't understand." Maxwell, still holding out the check, exhaled. "Your son was trying to raise $50 for your medicine. Instead, he walked out with over $1 million. He paused. "I covered your medical expenses personally." Emily's breath itched, her lips parting slightly as if she hadn't fully heard him. Oliver watched as she stared at the check, her hands trembling at her sides. But then, to his surprise, she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "No," she said. Both Oliver and Maxwell froze. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "No?" Emily shook her head. "I can't take this." Oliver's heart dropped. "Mom, what?" "Why?" Emily's gaze flickered with emotion, but her voice remained steady. "Because I don't want charity," she said firmly. "I appreciate what you've done for Oliver, and I'm grateful you helped him, but I can't take more than what we actually need." Maxwell stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing through his eyes. Then, slowly, he folded the check back in half and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "All right," he said simply. "Then don't think of it as charity." Emily frowned. "What else would it be?" Maxwell's smirk returned, though it was softer this time. "Think of it as an investment in your future." Emily let out a short, incredulous breath. "That's still charity." "No," Maxwell countered. "Charity is when you give money away without expecting anything in return. An investment is different." His gaze flicked to Oliver. "Your son fought for you tonight. He didn't ask for pity. He asked for an opportunity." He turned back to Emily, his expression turning serious. "So, here's an opportunity. You don't have to take everything. But if you let me help, I can make sure you don't have to struggle anymore." Emily's lips pressed together, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. Oliver could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she wanted so badly to accept but couldn't bring herself to do it. It was in the tightness of her jaw, the way she blinked rapidly as if trying to fight back tears. Before she could say anything else, Oliver grabbed Maxwell's sleeve. "Hey, Mr. Maxwell," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "You should stay for dinner. Mom makes the best spaghetti." Maxwell blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift. Emily looked just as surprised. "Oliver," she started. But Maxwell, to both their shock, actually looked like he was considering it. His lips twitched slightly, and for the first time, there was something almost genuine in his expression. "Spaghetti, huh?" he mused. Oliver nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah. It's really good." Emily shook her head, looking exasperated. "Oliver, I don't think Mr. Harrington, I think I'd like that," Maxwell interrupted. Emily's eyes widened. Oliver grinned. Maxwell, billionaire, businessman, and the last person who had any business being in their small apartment, stepped inside. And for the first time in a long time, Oliver saw his mother smile. The scent of garlic and simmering tomatoes filled the small apartment as Emily stirred a pot of sauce on the stove, glancing every so often at the man sitting uncomfortably at the tiny kitchen table. Maxwell Harrington, billionaire, business mogul, and completely out of his element in a home like this, had traded his usual polished, effortless confidence for something more hesitant, like he wasn't sure where to place his hands or what to do with himself in a space so different from the world he was used to. Oliver, however, seemed completely at ease, moving around the kitchen with practiced steps as he grabbed plates from the cupboard and set them on the table. He had seen his mother cook 100 times before, knew exactly how to stay out of her way when she was working. Maxwell, on the other hand, looked downright lost. "Do you need help with anything?" he asked finally, leaning forward like he was ready to jump in at a moment's notice. Emily raised an eyebrow, giving him a quick once-over before shaking her head. "No offense, Mr. Harrington, but I don't think you've ever chopped an onion in your life." Oliver grinned as he sat down. "Yeah, for a billionaire, you're kinda useless in a kitchen." Maxwell exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "That obvious?" "Painfully," Emily said, a small smirk playing at her lips. "You look like you're waiting for someone to bring out a steak and a glass of 100-year-old wine." Maxwell chuckled, tilting his head. "I mean, I wouldn't say no." Emily let out a soft laugh despite herself. It caught her off guard, how easy it was to slip into this conversation, how strange it felt to have someone like Maxwell Harrington sitting in her kitchen, waiting for a plate of spaghetti like a regular person. A part of her still didn't fully trust it, didn't trust him, but another part of her, one she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge, found herself watching him with a flicker of curiosity. She turned back to the stove, shaking her head. "Well, sorry to disappoint. You're getting what's in the pot, and you're going to like it." "I'm sure I will," Maxwell said easily, leaning back in his chair. "Though I have to say, it's been a long time since I've had a home-cooked meal." Oliver looked up from the fork he was fiddling with. "You don't cook?" Maxwell hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Haven't had much of a reason to." Emily glanced at him from the corner of her eye. She didn't know much about Maxwell outside of the headlines: ruthless businessman, billionaire investor, the kind of man who could buy an entire city block without blinking. But something about the way he said it made her pause. He wasn't bragging about having a private chef or expensive meals at high-end restaurants. If anything, there was something almost hollow in the way he said it. "Well," she said after a moment, turning off the stove and grabbing the plates. "Tonight you do." She placed the food in front of them, sliding a steaming plate of spaghetti toward Maxwell before sitting down across from him. He eyed the dish for a moment before twirling some pasta onto his fork and taking a bite. Oliver watched closely, waiting for his reaction. Maxwell chewed, swallowed, and then, without the usual businessman composure, let out a quiet groan of approval. "Okay," he admitted, nodding. "This is actually fantastic." Oliver grinned. "Told you." Emily smirked, but there was warmth behind it. "Not bad for someone who doesn't have a private chef, huh?" Maxwell set his fork down for a second, looking between them. "No," he said, voice softer. "Not bad at all." For the first time since walking into the apartment, he let himself relax, let himself exist in this moment without thinking about numbers or investments, or the millions of moving parts in his usual world. The room was small, the furniture mismatched, the wallpaper peeling slightly in the corners, but it was warm, lived in, filled with laughter and the quiet kind of love that didn't need to be spoken aloud. It was nothing like his penthouse, where every piece of furniture had been handpicked by a designer, where every surface was polished and expensive but utterly lifeless. He didn't realize how much he had missed something he had never really had. "So," he said after a few minutes, looking at Emily, "you made those chocolates Oliver was selling, right?" Emily nodded, twirling her fork through her spaghetti. "Yeah. I used to make them all the time. It was kind of a hobby." Oliver perked up. "Mom used to work at this little bakery downtown before I was born. She was gonna open her own shop one day, but then, well..." He hesitated, glancing at his mom. Emily gave him a small smile before looking back at Maxwell. Then life happened. Maxwell studied her, his mind already running with ideas. "You still bake?" "Every now and then," Emily admitted. "Mostly for Oliver. Sometimes I sell a few things to neighbors when we need extra money." Maxwell leaned forward slightly. "You ever think about trying again?" Emily let out a small, humorless laugh. "Trying again? Opening your own bakery?" She shook her head. "That's not exactly realistic." "Why not?" Emily blinked at him, as if the question was absurd. "Because I don't have the money for one." Maxwell set his fork down, his eyes locking onto hers. "What if that wasn't a problem?" Emily narrowed her eyes. "You're not serious." "I'm very serious," Maxwell said smoothly. "I invest in businesses all the time. I know a good idea when I see one. And if your chocolates taste anything like your spaghetti, I'd say you have a pretty solid product." Emily exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "No. Absolutely not." Maxwell's brow furrowed slightly, caught off guard. "Why not?" "Because," she said, voice firm, "I don't need you to fix my life." The words hung between them, sharp and final. Maxwell leaned back slightly, studying her, something unreadable passing through his gaze. He wasn't used to people turning down his offers. When he made a deal, people jumped at it. But Emily Chokes wasn't most people. For the first time in years, someone was telling him no. And for some reason, instead of being annoyed, he was intrigued. Oliver, oblivious to the tension, poked at his spaghetti. "You know, Mom, it wouldn't be the worst idea." Emily sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. "Oliver." "What?" Oliver said, grinning. "I mean, if we're already taking his money for your medicine, maybe a bakery wouldn't be so bad?" Maxwell chuckled, but he didn't push. "Not yet." Instead, he leaned back, smirking slightly. "Well, the offer stands." Emily shot him a look but said nothing. Maxwell took another bite of spaghetti, enjoying it just a little bit more now. Maybe, just maybe, this night was turning into something more than just a good deed. The days after Maxwell's unexpected dinner visit felt surreal for Emily. She kept waiting for the moment when it would all seem like a strange dream, when reality would come crashing down and remind her that men like Maxwell Harrington didn't just waltz into lives like hers. But the check was real, the relief of knowing her medical bills were covered was real, and most surprisingly, the way Oliver talked about Maxwell now, as if he was some kind of hero, was also real. She told herself it didn't matter. That Maxwell would move on soon, return to his world of billion-dollar deals and luxury boardrooms, and she and Oliver would go back to the way things were. But deep down, a small voice whispered that she wasn't so sure anymore. It had been 3 days since Maxwell's visit, and she was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a bowl, when a sharp knock at the door made her pause. Oliver, who had been sitting at the table doing homework, looked up. "Maybe it's Mr. Maxwell," he said, a hopeful edge to his voice. Emily wiped her hands on a dish towel, shaking her head. "I doubt it." She crossed the room and pulled open the door. The breath left her lungs. "Ryan." He stood there, leaning against the doorframe like he had never left, a cocky smirk tugging at his lips. His hair was shorter than she remembered, his beard neatly trimmed, but the same sharp, calculating glint was in his eyes. The same glint that had always made her uneasy. "Hey, Em," he said, voice smooth as ever. "Long time, huh?" Emily's fingers tightened on the edge of the door. Her first instinct was to slam it shut, but before she could react, Oliver's voice piped up behind her. "Dad?" Emily flinched. Ryan's smirk widened as he shifted his gaze to Oliver. "Hey, buddy," he said, as if the past 8 years had never happened. "You've grown." Oliver stayed frozen in place, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. Emily could see the hesitation in his eyes, the way his fingers curled slightly against the table. Her heart clenched. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice flat. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair in a way that once might have been charming but now just made her wary. "Can't a guy check in on his family?" She let out a short laugh, one with no humor. "You don't have a family here." Ryan ignored that. "I heard about what happened," he said, tilting his head slightly. "About Oliver's little stunt at that gala." Emily's stomach dropped. "How?" Ryan shrugged. "People talk. The internet exists. Imagine my surprise when I find out my son's rubbing elbows with billionaires now." Emily's pulse quickened. This wasn't a coincidence. Ryan didn't do anything without a reason, and suddenly appearing after all these years? It wasn't concern. It was something else. Oliver, still standing stiffly behind her, finally spoke. Are you really my dad?" His voice was small, uncertain. Ryan's gaze softened, just enough to look convincing. "Of course I am, kid. And I know I wasn't around, but things were complicated." He sighed, shaking his head like it was some great tragedy. "But I'm here now." Emily wanted to scream. He was playing the part so well, making himself look like the reformed father who had just made a few mistakes. And Oliver, sweet, trusting Oliver, was buying it, if only a little. Ryan stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Can I come in?" Emily stiffened. "No." Ryan's eyes darkened, but the smile stayed. No," she repeated, firmer this time. "You don't get to walk back in here like nothing happened. You left. You made your choice." Ryan's jaw tensed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he shifted tactics, glancing at Oliver again. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when my kid was hanging out with rich guys," he said casually. "That Maxwell guy must really like you, huh?" Emily's stomach twisted. She knew exactly where this was going. Oliver hesitated before nodding. "Yeah. He's helped us a lot." Ryan clicked his tongue. "That's so?" He gave a small, amused shake of his head. "Listen, kid. I don't want to ruin the fun, but guys like that, they don't do things out of the kindness of their hearts." Oliver frowned. "What do you mean?" Ryan leaned against the doorframe again, crossing his arms. "I mean, rich guys don't hand out money for no reason. You think he's really doing this for you? Or does he just like looking good in front of his fancy friends?" Emily's hands clenched into fists. "Ryan, stop." But Oliver looked unsure now, his eyes darting downward, doubt creeping into his features. "No, that's not true. Maxwell, he didn't have to do any of this." Ryan scoffed. "Exactly. So why did he?" He tilted his head. "Think about it, buddy. He's a billionaire. He doesn't do anything unless there's something in it for him. And trust me, guys like him? They always leave." Oliver's expression darkened. "Like you did?" Ryan's smirk faltered just slightly. "That's different." Emily couldn't take it anymore. "Get out," she snapped. Ryan straightened, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, Em. I'm just looking out for my kid." "You don't have a kid," she said through clenched teeth. "Not anymore." Ryan's eyes hardened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned to Oliver, giving him a long, considering look. "You'll see, kid," he said. "One day, you'll realize I was right." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall. Emily exhaled, her entire body shaking. She turned to Oliver, ready to reassure him, to tell him Ryan was just trying to manipulate him, but the words died in her throat when she saw his face. He looked lost. "Oliver," she said gently. He stepped back, shaking his head. "I need to think." Emily's heart clenched as he turned and disappeared into his room, shutting the door behind him. She let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand to her forehead. She knew Ryan was trouble, knew he was planting seeds of doubt in Oliver's head. But she hadn't expected it to work so quickly. And she especially hadn't expected that, for the first time since meeting Maxwell, Oliver suddenly wasn't so sure if he trusted him anymore. Emily barely slept that night. After Oliver locked himself in his room, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the fading wood grain, her fingers trembling around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Ryan was back. The man who had walked out on them without a second thought. The man who had never so much as sent a birthday card or made a phone call. And now, after 8 years, he had waltzed in like he had a right to claim her son. She knew Ryan. Knew how he operated. He was smooth, calculated, always one step ahead in the worst possible way. And the fact that he had shown up now, after all these years, after Maxwell had stepped into their lives, was no coincidence. Her stomach twisted as she thought of the look on Oliver's face. The doubt. The uncertainty. Ryan had planted a seed, and she could already feel it taking root. He didn't need Oliver to believe him entirely. He just needed him to question things enough to pull away. The next morning, Oliver barely said a word before leaving for school. He muttered a distracted goodbye, his eyes downcast, his usual spark dulled. Emily wanted to reach out, to tell him not to believe a word Ryan said, but she knew Oliver. He was stubborn, thoughtful. He needed time to work things out on his own. What she hadn't expected was how little time Ryan would waste making his next move. It happened that afternoon. She was at work, wiping down tables at the cafe, when her phone buzzed. She nearly ignored it. Her shift wasn't over yet, but when she saw the caller ID, her blood turned to ice. Unknown number. A bad feeling settled in her gut as she stepped outside, pressing the phone to her ear. Emily Chokes? The voice on the other end was professional, clipped. Yes, she said warily. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Ryan Chokes. He has formally filed for partial custody of Oliver Chokes, citing parental rights and the best interest of the child. Emily's vision blurred. Her breath caught in her throat. What? The voice continued unfazed. Mr. Chokes wishes to re-establish a parental relationship with his son and is seeking shared custody. A mediation hearing has been scheduled for next week. Emily's grip on the phone tightened. This is a joke, she said, her voice low and shaking. The lawyer didn't react. You have the right to contest the claim, of course. However, Mr. Chokes' argument states that Oliver would benefit from having both parents involved in his life. A judge may take into account your current financial situation, work schedule, and home environment. A cold sweat broke out on the back of Emily's neck. She knew exactly what that meant. Single mother. Financially unstable. Long work hours. Ryan was playing the system. He wasn't trying to be a father. He was trying to win. She forced herself to breathe. Tell Ryan I'll see him in court. She hung up before the lawyer could respond, her hands shaking as she shoved her phone back into her pocket. By the time she got home that night, Oliver was already in his room, the door slightly ajar. She stood outside for a moment, watching as he sat on his bed, flipping through one of his old comic books. She knocked gently. Hey, kiddo. Oliver glanced up but didn't say anything. She hesitated before stepping inside. I have to tell you something. Oliver sighed, setting the comic book aside. It's about Dad, isn't it? Emily's stomach tightened. Yeah. He picked at a loose thread on his blanket, his voice quieter than usual. What did he do now? She sat beside him, inhaling sharply before saying the words that made her sick. He's filing for custody. Oliver's head snapped up. What? She nodded, forcing herself to stay calm for his sake. He wants visitation rights. Maybe more. Oliver stared at her like she had just told him the world had stopped spinning. But he doesn't even know me. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. I know, baby. Oliver clenched his fists. What if I don't want to go with him? Emily placed a hand on his. Then we fight it. Oliver exhaled shakily, but she could see the fear in his eyes. The doubt. And Ryan had put that there. That night, Emily sat in the kitchen, rubbing her temples as exhaustion threatened to consume her. She could fight this, but she needed help. Legal help. But every lawyer she had called earlier had the same answer: expensive retainers, hourly fees she couldn't afford. She was on the verge of breaking down when a knock at the door startled her. She wiped her face quickly before opening it, her breath hitching when she saw Maxwell standing there, hands in his coat pockets. His gaze swept over her face, and she could tell immediately that he knew something was wrong. What happened? Emily swallowed, hesitating. She didn't want to tell him. Didn't want to be the woman who ran to a billionaire for help the moment things got bad. But then she thought of Oliver. Ryan's filing for custody, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Maxwell's expression darkened instantly. He didn't look surprised. He looked furious. He's playing dirty, she continued, crossing her arms tightly. He's going to use my job, our apartment, everything against me. And I can't afford a lawyer. You have one. Maxwell cut in. Emily blinked. What? Maxwell's jaw tightened. You have a lawyer. I hired one this morning. Her breath caught. I knew Ryan would pull something like this, Maxwell said, his voice firm. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for it to happen. Emily felt lightheaded. I can't let you do that. You don't have a choice, he said bluntly. This isn't about pride, Emily. It's about keeping your son safe. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him she could handle it on her own. But she couldn't. And Maxwell knew it. She exhaled shakily, finally nodding. Okay. Maxwell's face softened just slightly. I'll take care of it. Emily studied him for a moment. The way he stood there, completely sure, completely unwavering. And for the first time since Ryan had walked back into their lives, she didn't feel completely alone. But neither of them knew that upstairs, just out of view, Oliver was standing by the staircase, listening. And as much as he wanted to believe Maxwell was on their side, Ryan's words still echoed in his mind. Guys like him always leave. And for the first time, Oliver wondered if his dad might have been right. The tension in the apartment felt suffocating. Days had passed since Ryan's custody threat, and though Maxwell had stepped in with legal help, the weight of it still loomed over Emily like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Oliver had grown distant, quieter than usual. She caught him staring off sometimes, brows furrowed, as if he was trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't quite fit. She knew what he was thinking. Knew Ryan's words had wormed their way into his heart, planting doubt where trust had once been. And as much as she wanted to reassure him, she didn't know how. Because part of her was questioning everything too. She wasn't used to someone like Maxwell stepping in, making things happen with a phone call, a flick of his wrist. She had spent so many years fighting alone, struggling to make ends meet, scraping by on her own strength. And now, here was a man who could solve problems in ways she never could. But wasn't that the problem? If she let herself rely on him, where did that leave her? She didn't get the chance to figure it out before Ryan forced her hand. It happened late in the evening. Emily had just finished washing dishes when the knock came. A sharp, deliberate rap against the door. She froze, heart already pounding. She knew before she even opened it. Ryan stood there, a smug smile on his face, his hands stuffed casually into the pockets of his leather jacket. Evening, Em. Emily gritted her teeth. What do you want? Ryan clicked his tongue, tilting his head slightly. That's no way to greet your son's father now, is it? Her grip tightened on the door. Get to the point. He smirked. All right. Here's the deal. I'll drop the custody case. Emily's stomach twisted. This wasn't right. Ryan didn't back down. He didn't make deals unless they benefited him. What's the catch? Ryan let out a short chuckle. You always were smart. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I want to pay out. Emily's breath caught. What? You heard me. Ryan's smirk deepened. I'll walk away. For a price. She stared at him, disgust curling in her gut. You don't care about Oliver at all, do you? His smile vanished. I care about what's fair. He straightened. And what's fair is that if Maxwell Harrington wants to play hero, he should put his money where his mouth is. Her blood turned to ice. You want Maxwell to pay you? Ryan spread his arms. Think about it. It's a win-win. I walk away, you keep your kid, and your billionaire boyfriend. His lips curled mockingly at the word. Gets to be the savior he so desperately wants to be. Emily's hands shook. She was going to be sick. You're unbelievable. No, Ryan corrected, stepping back with a smug confidence that made her want to hit something. I'm practical. And let's be honest, Em, you don't have many options. Emily's body burned with rage, but before she could even process what to do next, another voice cut through the night. You really are a piece of work. Ryan turned just as Maxwell stepped up beside Emily. His usual easy smirk was nowhere to be found. His expression was cold, sharp, the controlled fury of a man who had seen people like Ryan before, and had no patience for them. Ryan let out a slow whistle. Speak of the devil. Maxwell ignored him. His eyes were locked onto Emily. Is he serious? Emily swallowed, her throat tight. Yes. Ryan grinned. So what do you say, Mr. Moneybags? Want to make this go away? Maxwell's jaw clenched. You don't deserve to be in that boy's life. Ryan snorted. And you do? His eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. You think money makes you a father? Maxwell didn't flinch, but something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something vulnerable, buried beneath layers of control. Ryan saw it. And like the parasite he was, he latched on. That's what this is about, isn't it? Ryan pressed. You get to swoop in, throw some cash around, and suddenly you're the good guy. You're the one Oliver looks up to. Emily's hands curled into fists. Shut up, Ryan. But Ryan wasn't done. Let me guess, deep down, you think that makes up for something. Maybe your own daddy issues, huh? He smirked. I bet you were just another rich kid who got tossed aside when something shinier came along. Maxwell's fists clenched at his sides. Ryan's smirk widened. Hit a nerve? Maxwell exhaled slowly, his voice dangerously calm. You're pathetic. Ryan's expression darkened. And you're predictable. Guys like you, Maxwell? You think money gives you control. You think it lets you waltz into people's lives and fix everything. But the second things get messy, you'll disappear. Just like you always do. Emily flinched. Not because Ryan's words hurt her, but because a small part of her was terrified they might be true. Ryan saw her hesitation. His smirk returned. CM? You know I'm right. Enough. Maxwell snapped. Emily turned to him, but the look on his face sent her stomach plummeting. He wasn't just angry. He was hurt. Ryan scoffed. Well, if you're not gonna pay up, I guess I'll see you both in court. He gave Emily one last smug glance before strolling away, hands in his pockets like he didn't have a care in the world. Silence stretched in the wake of his departure. Emily turned back to Maxwell, but before she could say anything, he spoke first. He's right about one thing, he said quietly. Emily frowned. What? I don't belong here. Her chest tightened. Maxwell, you don't need another man trying to fix everything with money, right? His voice was even, but she could hear the undercurrent of emotion. He shook his head. I get it. She took a step closer. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? He let out a quiet, humorless chuckle. You don't trust me. Emily hesitated. That second of silence, that single moment where doubt crossed her mind, it was enough. Maxwell nodded slightly, like that was all the confirmation he needed. I should go. Panic flared in her chest. Maxwell, don't. But he was already turning. Emily watched, helpless, as he walked away. And this time, she wasn't sure he was coming back. The days after Maxwell walked away were heavy with silence. Emily felt it in every corner of the apartment, in the way Oliver barely spoke, in the way she kept expecting a knock on the door that never came. She told herself it was for the best. Maxwell had his own world, a life where problems were solved with money and influence, and she had hers, a life built on scraping by, on never expecting anyone to stay. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. Oliver was taking it worse. He didn't say much, but she caught him staring at his phone, fingers hovering over the screen, like he was debating whether to send a message. He never did. Instead, he kept to himself, quieter than usual. His usual spark dimmed. Ryan must have sensed it. The moment Maxwell was out of the picture, he wasted no time in making his next move. Emily was at work when she got the call. Her phone buzzed against the counter, and she grabbed it absently, still wiping down a table. The second she saw the number, her stomach dropped. "Mrs. Chokes?" The school secretary's voice was calm but urgent. "Is Oliver supposed to be leaving early today?" Emily nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "There's a man here. He says he's Oliver's father." A cold, suffocating panic gripped her. "Do not let him leave. I'm on my way." She barely remembered running out of the cafe, barely remembered anything except the pounding of her heartbeat as she flagged down a cab and barked out the address to the school. Every possible scenario played in her head, each one worse than the last. Ryan was manipulative, but would he really go this far? Would he actually try to take Oliver? By the time she arrived at the school, she was shaking. She shoved open the front doors, scanning the hallway frantically. And then she saw him. Ryan stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets, his usual smirk firmly in place. But Oliver was standing stiffly a few feet away, arms crossed, his expression a mix of confusion and frustration. Emily stormed toward them, her voice sharp. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ryan turned, acting as if he had just been having a casual conversation. "Relax, Em. I was just taking my son home." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "You don't get to make that decision." Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I figured you'd be busy. Thought I'd save you the trip." Emily turned to Oliver, her voice softer. "Are you okay?" Oliver nodded, but his jaw was tight. "I wasn't going to go with him." Ryan let out an exaggerated sigh. "Come on, kid, don't be like that. I thought we could hang out. Maybe grab a burger, talk like father and son." Oliver's expression hardened. "You're not my dad." Something inside Emily cracked. Ryan's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. "Kid, don't say that. I'm trying here." "No, you're not," Oliver said, his voice shaking but firm. "You only came back because of Maxwell. You don't care about me. You never did." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "That's not true." "Yeah, it is," Oliver shot back. "And you know it." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat, trying to keep her own emotions in check. Oliver had been struggling, torn between wanting to believe his father had changed and knowing deep down that he hadn't. But now, looking at the way he stood, shoulders back, chin lifted, she realized that doubt was gone. He had made his choice. Ryan must have realized it too, because his mask of charm and feigned sincerity slipped, replaced with something sharper. "Fine," he muttered. "You're just like your mother. Stubborn." Emily stepped forward, lowering her voice. "You lost, Ryan. And you know it." His jaw tightened, and for a brief second, she thought he might try one last move, some final dig to remind them that he still had power. But then he let out a frustrated breath, shaking his head. "Whatever. Not worth the trouble." And just like that, he walked away. Emily stood there for a long moment, waiting to feel relief. But all she felt was an overwhelming sadness, for Oliver, for herself, for the years of struggle that had led to this moment. Oliver tugged at her sleeve. "Can we go home?" She nodded, wrapping an arm around his shoulders as they walked out together. That night, As they sat on the couch eating takeout, Oliver was quiet. He poked at his food, brows furrowed in thought. Finally, he spoke. "I don't want him, Mom." Emily set down her fork. "I know." Oliver took a deep breath. "I want Maxwell." Her heart twisted. She had spent so much time keeping her guard up, convincing herself that needing someone like Maxwell was dangerous. That depending on him was a mistake. But Oliver wasn't afraid to admit what she wouldn't. And the truth was, she wanted him too. She ran a hand through Oliver's hair. "I think I might have messed things up with him." Oliver frowned. "Then fix it." Emily exhaled, shaking her head. "It's not that simple." "Yeah, it is," Oliver said. "You always tell me that if I mess up, I should say I'm sorry. Maybe you should too." She stared at him, her stubborn, kind-hearted, impossibly wise son, and something inside her cracked open. He was right. The next morning, she made her decision. She was going to find Maxwell. But when she called his office, his assistant hesitated. I'm sorry, Miss Chokes. Mr. Harrington left this morning." Her stomach dropped. "Left? For an overseas trip. He'll be gone for a while." Emily's throat tightened. "Do you know where?" There was a pause. "I really can't say." She hung up, gripping the phone in her hands. Had she really pushed him away for good? Was it already too late? Maxwell sat in the airport lounge, fingers tapping absently against the armrest of his chair as he stared out the window. The plane would board soon. His schedule was packed. The next few months would be filled with business meetings, deals, distractions. Everything he needed to move forward. So why did it feel like he was running away? He reached into his pocket, searching for his phone, but his fingers brushed against something else. A small, crinkled wrapper. His hand closed around it, and when he pulled it out, his chest tightened. One of Oliver's homemade candies. He stared at it for a long time, turning it over between his fingers. He had forgotten it was there, but now, holding it, all he could think about was the way Oliver had looked up at him, trusting. The way Emily had laughed when he burned his hand cooking. The way he had felt like, for the first time in years, he wasn't just fixing things, he was part of something. And then he thought about the way he had walked away. His jaw clenched. He wasn't running from them. He was running from the possibility that he might actually belong. But maybe he already did. Before he could think twice, he stood, grabbing his bag. He wasn't getting on that plane. Emily didn't know how Oliver had convinced her to go on a vacation. One moment, he had been pestering her about taking a break, and the next, he had somehow managed to book them a weekend getaway. She should have been suspicious, the kid was clever, after all, but she had been too exhausted to argue. Between Ryan's failed custody stunt and the lingering ache of Maxwell's absence, she had barely had time to breathe. So, when Oliver had pushed the tickets into her hands, grinning ear to ear, she had reluctantly agreed. Now, standing in front of an impossibly luxurious resort, she was convinced something wasn't right. "This is where we're staying?" she asked, adjusting the strap of her duffel bag over her shoulder. Oliver nodded, barely containing his excitement. "Yep." Emily frowned, eyeing the towering palm trees and the sprawling, private beachfront beyond the gates. "Oliver, how exactly did you book this?" Oliver shifted his weight, looking everywhere but at her. I had help." Before she could press him further, a familiar voice cut through the warm ocean breeze. "Oliver said you needed a break." Emily's breath caught as she turned. Maxwell stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, the setting sun casting a golden glow over his features. He was watching her with that same unreadable expression, the one that always made her feel like he was seeing straight through her walls. Emily's heart clenched. She hadn't seen him since that night, since she had all but thrown his help back in his face. And yet, here he was. She turned to Oliver, narrowing her eyes. "You set this up." Oliver grinned. "Smart kid, huh?" Emily let out a shaky breath, shaking her head. "Unbelievable." Maxwell took a step closer. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Emily swallowed hard, suddenly hyper-aware of the way her pulse quickened just from being near him. I wasn't sure either. There was a beat of silence, thick with everything they hadn't said to each other. Then Maxwell spoke, his voice softer. Emily, I'm sorry, she blurted out before he could finish. Maxwell blinked. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. I pushed you away. I let Ryan get in my head. And I was scared, okay? She dropped her hands, meeting his gaze. I've spent so long doing everything alone that I didn't know how to let someone in. But you didn't deserve that. Maxwell was quiet for a moment. Then he took another step, close enough now that she could see the faint creases in his forehead, the tension in his jaw. You don't need saving, Emily. You never did. His voice was steady, sure. But maybe. I just want to be part of your story. Emily's chest tightened. Are you sure? Because my life isn't easy. Maxwell gave her a small, knowing smile. I don't do easy. Something inside her cracked wide open. She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. Well, at least you know what you're signing up for. Maxwell smirked. Oh, I do. Oliver, who had been watching impatiently, finally groaned. Okay, this is great and all, but you guys are taking forever. Emily laughed, wiping at her eyes. You planned this whole thing, didn't you? Oliver shrugged. Maybe. Maxwell chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. Remind me to hire you when you're older. That evening, the three of them walked along the private beach, the sky painted in deep hues of orange and pink. The waves lapped gently at their feet, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt light. Like the weight of the past wasn't pressing down on her anymore. Maxwell stopped suddenly, turning to face them. Emily raised an eyebrow. What? Maxwell inhaled deeply, as if steadying himself. Then, to her utter shock, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, and dropped to one knee. Emily's breath caught. Oliver's eyes widened. No way. Maxwell looked up at her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. Emily chokes, you drive me insane. You challenge me. You make me rethink everything I thought I knew about my life. He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. And I wouldn't change a single thing about you. Emily's hands trembled. I don't just want to marry you, Maxwell continued. His gaze shifted to Oliver, full of warmth. I want to be there for him too. If he'll have me. Oliver's mouth parted slightly, and for a moment, he looked completely stunned. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. Only if I get to call you Max instead of Mr. Maxwell. Maxwell let out a breathy laugh. Deal. Emily felt tears well in her eyes. She dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Maxwell smiled. Yeah? She nodded, blinking back tears. Yes. Oliver whooped, throwing his arms in the air. Best vacation ever! Maxwell laughed, pulling Emily into a deep, lingering kiss. The waves crashed softly behind them, the sun dipping below the horizon, and for the first time in years, Emily wasn't just surviving. She was home. With them. Her family.